Well, hello again, everybody, and welcome to this podcast. And to any of you listening on my other platforms, a warm welcome. Now, what I want to talk to you about is the fact that Pluto will be leaving Capricorn for good and entering Aquarius where it will be for about the next 15 years in 2025. Now, as you know, Pluto's kind of been in and out. It's been retrograde, so it's been back in Capricorn, then back in Aquarius, then back in Capricorn. And I think that's what's caused a lot of indecisiveness, and particularly in terms of the American pregnancy, Trump, is he going to jail? Is he going to be convicted of fraud? Is he going to be assassinated? Biden, is he fit to serve? Isn't he? Will Kamala step in? Will Kamala make it? Who will it be at the DNC conference? There's this toing and froing in terms of American politics. And for all of those of you who follow people like Jeff Berwick and Gerald Celente, you'll also know they've been saying, the market crash is coming. It's coming. Oh, but it hasn't happened yet. But it's coming. We've been teetering on the edge of something. And whether people are feeling it on a financial, an esoteric, or a political level, we all know we're on the edge of something. And I think Pluto and Aquarius, or just trying to enter Aquarius but reversing back into Capricorn, is reflecting this state of flux where we're just on the cusp of something but not there quite yet. Now, I am going to prove to you that Pluto entering Aquarius is a big deal. Now, what other astrologer will offer you proof? Lots of other astrologers will give you a whole lot of vague, nuanced, generalized ideas of what Pluto in Aquarius can mean for you personally or politically. But none of them is going to prove to you that it's vitally important. And that's what I want to do. So while we have to use our imaginations to an extent to understand what Pluto in Aquarius is going to mean exactly, we can certainly show through history that Pluto entering a new sign is vitally important to world events. And the world events that take place are always connected to the sign that Pluto is entering. Now, for those of you, just a reminder, Pluto is the furthest planet from the sun. Therefore, it spends the longest time in each sign, but it doesn't spend an equal amount of time in each sign. I think it was only in Scorpio for about 12 years, and it's been in Capricorn since 2008, which is like 16 years. It was in Cancer forever. So, it's not regular, it's orbit. So that's something to bear in mind when we look through its phases. Now, how far should we go back? I'm going to look at when Pluto went into Aries, but that's kind of way back. So let's look at something tangible. Pluto went into Taurus in 1852. Now, as you know, Taurus is a sign of pragmatism, material production, and also money. So what happened when it went into Taurus? Well, one of the things that happened was the Chartered Bank of India, Australia, and China was incorporated, and Wells Fargo and Company were incorporated. That's in 1852 when it went into Taurus. So there we have the theme of banking. But during Pluto's phase in Taurus, there was also an enormous period of economic expansion, and concepts like standardized parts became de rigueur, and the Industrial Revolution reached its peak, and there was loads of factories established and cotton mills, an enormous amount of building in cities like New York, and great economic activity in the United States and Europe. Now, something else which was very significant, in 1852, as Pluto's entering Taurus, the Future Waterbury Clock Company is founded as a department within Benedict and Berman Manufacturing Company in Waterbury, Connecticut. And this was the predecessor of the Timex Group, obviously Timex watches, leaders in timepiece manufacturing. And in the following year, 1853, so Pluto is still freshly in Taurus, Tissot was founded by Charles Félicien Tissot and his son Charles Émile Tissot in the Swiss city of Le Local. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong. So the father and son team, worked together and were expert watchmakers. So isn't that interesting that just as Pluto goes into Taurus, we have these watch companies founded, which we still know today as household names. And to me, although a watch has a feeling of Virgo to it, it's also very Taurian in the fact of the, the cogs, the wheels, the mechanics of it working together. And it's such an everyday, almost reassuring kind of, in this day and age, almost conservative item. It's very pragmatic, isn't it? It's very earthy and grounding, a watch. And that was Pluto in Taurus. But something else we know about Taurus is it's the sign of music. And I think it's absolutely fascinating that C. Bernstein's piano factory was founded in 1852, and it was one of 3 piano factories established in what was called a golden year in the history of the piano. So Julius Bluthmeier and Steinway and Sons were the other piano companies. So as Pluto goes into Taurus, 3 of the main piano companies that we still know as household names today, right? And there's something kind of similar to clockwork and pianos in the mechanics of it, really, that matches quite well, I think, with Taurus. So there we go, banks, pianos, and watches as Pluto goes into Taurus. Now, Pluto went into Gemini in 1884. Now, what do you associate with Gemini? Transport. Cars. It's the sign of sort of short distance travel and commute. So what happens in 1854? Well, on April the 3rd, Gottlieb Daimler is granted a German patent for his single-cylinder water-cooled engine design. The same year, Carl Benz, obviously Mercedes-Benz, produces the Benz patent motor wagon, regarded as the first automobile, and it was patented and publicly launched the following year. In addition, John Kemp Stanley demonstrated the Rover safety bicycle, regarded as the first practical modern bicycle. And Gottlieb Daimler was also granted a German patent for the Daimler Reitwagen, regarded as the first motorcycle, which he produced. So, I mean, that's kind of amazing, isn't it? Now, something else we associate with both Taurus and also Gemini are skyscrapers. Taurus because it's building and construction, and skyscrapers because of the commerce in these buildings, the vision, kind of the excitement of the big city life and the skyscraper. And what happens in 1852? Well, the home insurance building in Chicago, designed by William Le Baron Jenny, is completed. It has 10 floors and a fireproof weight-bearing metal frame, and is regarded as the first skyscraper. So that's as Pluto leaves Taurus and enters Gemini, incorporating kind of a mix of both energies. Also interesting that year, as Pluto enters Gemini, there was the invention of local anesthetics by Karl Koller, and it was made public in a medical congress in Heidelberg, Germany. So that was rather interesting. And in Nagasaki, shipyard predecessor of the Japanese aircraft and shipbuilding business Mitsubishi is founded. So as Pluto enters Gemini, we've got Mercedes-Benz, Daimler, Mitsubishi being established, first skyscraper, and invention of the local anesthetic. Not really sure how that relates to Gemini, but you can use your imagination. Something else rather interesting to me is the first tennis tournament was held in the grounds of Shrubland Hall in Leamington Spa. So basically tennis was invented, and people don't often mention that it was invented in Leamington Spa, but of course a place close to my heart. So very interesting as well for that year. So let's then roll on to Pluto entering Cancer. Now this is very, very significant because Pluto entering Cancer was the beginning of World War I. Now this destroyed and created new empires. Now, America is a Cancer, and this was the beginning of the American Empire really coming to the fore as Europe was so decimated by World War I. It's also important because it was the end of the Ottoman Empire. Now, Cancer is the sign of countries, of patriotism, of kind of national fervor, patriotic feeling. So Pluto going into Cancer, we actually had the creation of many new countries because at the destruction of the Ottoman Empire, Sykes-Picot, French English team basically drew up all the new boundaries that created the countries we know now in the Middle East. So I think France had auspices over Syria, parts of Turkey, Kurdistan. Britain had auspices over I think Lebanon was also under France, but they had auspices over what is today southern Palestine, Israel, Jordan, and Iraq. And if you look at that area of the world, you see a lot of the lines are straight. So the borders of Jordan, Iran, Lebanon, whatever. They have very many straight lines. And these were drawn up by Sykes-Picot. They created all those countries. And for a while, a lot of those countries there were under protectorates of either Britain or France. And that maybe set the scene for a lot of what goes on today in the Middle East. So you had the creation of all these new countries, the destruction of the Ottoman Empire, the rise of the American Empire, also a lot of borders redefined in terms of Europe. We had, of course, World War I, devastating, and World War I was actually what led to World War II. It was really one long continuing war with a bit of peace in between. So you can see that that was also some extremely, what would you say, significant period. So Pluto goes into Cancer 1914 and is there till 1939, which also gives us a key date. Pluto enters Leo at the beginning of World War II. So two defining events in the 20th century was when Pluto entered a new sign. So let's have a little think too. Pluto in Leo, also many new countries created right after so it enters 1939 in the 1940s, while Pluto is in Leo. We have independence for India and Pakistan, the creation of Israel as a state, modern Italy, born 1946. So again, lots of new countries being created. Now, Leo, of course, is a sign of leadership, energy, power. It was the era in which atomic energy and atomic weapons were created. And for the first time, humanity was faced with this possibility of total destruction. And what came after World War II was the Cold War and the subsequent power blocks emerging. So we had Pluto entering Cancer, the emergence of a new empire, the American empire, the decline of the European empires and colonialism. And after World War II, we have the emergence of the Eastern Bloc and the Western Bloc of these two extremely powerful blocs. Now, Pluto went into Virgo in 1957. No war this time, but Virgo is a sign all about efficiency, work ethic, diligence, productivity, also health and practical applications of technology. And with Pluto and Virgo, there was revolutionary changes in employment and industrial production, definitely in medicine as well. Computers totally revolutionized science, business, industry, and labor unions, also ruled by Virgo, became a lot more powerful. There were lots of new discoveries in terms of medical science, but there was also the introduction of psychedelic drugs, and that created a change in the consciousness of the people in the early 60s, the flower power and all that. And Pluto in Virgo was also a time when there was lots of developments in terms of birth control, new medicines, tackling diseases, etc., but also an increase in the chemical processes that go into food. So more processed food, which in a way is counterintuitive. Virgo is about health, but it was also the introduction of these labor-saving food production techniques, which actually have led to a lot of ill health because, of mass production, etc., etc. Now, 1972, Pluto enters Libra. What happened in 1971? Well, we had the Nixon shock, which was when gold was taken off, the dollar was taken off the gold standard. This opened the way to consumerism and economies, particularly in America, Europe, being based on consumerism. Libra is the sign of luxury. It's a sign of shopping, of goods. And this created an explosion in the use of credit cards and the sort of culture we began to. It was a total shift in culture now. People wanted more stuff. People became more acquisitive, designer labels, cars, buy now, pay later. This whole mentality used to fuel the economy. And what was lost? Well, going from 1971 through 84, when Pluto goes into Scorpio, we have the Western economies placing a lesser emphasis on manufacturing, which is generally shipped to the Far East to become cheaper. And there's more of an emphasis on consumer spending is fueling the economy, value is kind of lost, isn't it? Value becomes more perceived. Markets run now more on sentiment and on confidence than on actual real things like production of raw materials, production, manufacturing. That becomes less of a thing, and we kind of move into this new era. What else we saw with Pluto and Libra was the destruction of marriage, of the marriage unit, people being more willing to get divorced, to live the single life, people getting, it became more common for people to enter into gay and bisexual relationships. So again, we've got this total change in relationships and marriage, which is ruled by Libra, and also people becoming a lot more materialistic, which is kind of the bad side of in a Libra, I wouldn't say it's fake, but the more superficial side of Libra was emphasized as well. So what happened when Pluto entered Scorpio in 1984? Now, prior to Pluto entering Scorpio, a lot of astrologers thought this was it. This was Armageddon, because we've got Pluto, destruction, we've got Scorpio, which is a sign of rebirth, renewal, but also of devastation, destruction, of dark energy and dark forces. So people thought this was like going to be nuclear war. And if you guys went to school in the 80s, you might have had classes on this where they talked about hiding under your desk if there was a nuclear bomb, like that was going to help you. And you discussed, the end of the world as we know it by REM was the song I remember we were playing in the class, where we had one of these sort of scenario building exercises around what would happen if there was a nuclear bomb. Well, it turned out there wasn't. There was Chernobyl, which is the closest we've got to kind of nuclear destruction, which wreaked havoc through radiation across Europe, which I believe in Greece is still felt through their high cancer rates, etc. But that was something that happened while Pluto was in Scorpio. But in fact, it was a huge time where a lot of very positive things happened. We had the Berlin Wall fell, the Soviet Union fell, whole of Eastern Europe were freed up, apartheid fell, and then afterwards the European Union was established, which in my mind, of course, it wasn't a good thing because it was too controlling and bureaucratic, as you know. But most people that listen to me would concur. But that was also something that was created. Now, another Pluto we know is sex. Scorpio is also connected to sexually transmitted diseases. And in 1984, when Pluto enters Scorpio, we have AIDS becoming a thing that's known about, talked about. It's in the news. It becomes a big scare story and remains so for many, many years. Right now, looking back, we question what was that all about. But during that time, it was a source of great fear among, first of all, the gay communities, but after all, among all communities. So that was another big feature of Pluto in Scorpio. Now, another thing we had was Maggie Thatcher and Ronald Reagan and supply-side economics, or, what else did they call it in those days? Sorry, I've just got to refer to my notes there, forgotten what they were calling it. It was the, let's just call it supply-side economics or Reaganomics. That's what it was called. Became a thing. And again, we see this massive decimation of manufacturing. Now, in the UK, in areas where they used to have shipbuilding, lots of mining, steelworks, those were sort of totally scaled back. I know in Pennsylvania it was very similar. And nothing ever really replaced that, leaving those areas in permanent decline that is still very much evident today. So the effects of Thatcher and Reagan and the sort of moving of all heavy industry off to the Far East and moving both Britain and America to a more financialized system has left deep scars in many parts of the country, with many people left behind, and a permanent impact, which arouses the more negative side of Pluto in Scorpio. So while enormous wealth was created, now remember, Scorpio is also about financial markets and the capital markets and mergers and acquisitions, shares, stocks. Well, shares and stocks is more Leo, but Scorpio is still very much connected to the financial markets and derivatives, and massive deregulation during that phase, particularly by Maggie in Britain, leading to the Big Bang. And in America as well, led to enormous wealth being created. But it also led to these disparages. So in the UK, it's stark. You had, multimillionaires being created in the city and billionaires, really. And then in other areas of the country where manufacturing was decimated, we saw a marked decline and permanent demoralization of those communities. So there was a huge widening of the gap between rich and poor during Pluto in Scorpio. So there were some positive political developments. There was a lot of hope for peace and renewal. There was booms in the UK, also a boom in home ownership under Maggie Thatcher. So there were some good things that created wealth. There were some positive developments economic in geopolitics. But what did it all mean? As we got to the end of Pluto Scorpio, we had the formation of the EU, which was basically a reformation of the concepts of the USSR with massive bureaucracy, lack of transparency, and subversion. Now, let's have a look at Pluto in Sagittarius. This is from the year 2000. Most significant to me is, as we go into 2001, we had 9/11. And Sagittarius is a sign very much about religion, fundamentalism, religious fanaticism. And as we go into 2001 with 9/11, suddenly Islam becomes a talking point. Islamic fanaticism, that was on the agenda and was for many, many years, along with religious-based terrorism. That became the talking point, and that became what dominated geopolitics. So again, we've got this destructiveness of Pluto. As it goes into Sagittarius, we start the incursions, well, what would you call it, the so-called democracy spreading in Afghanistan. We had the removal of Saddam Hussein. So the war on terror, and terror being defined mainly in this case as Islamic terror, began and defined our lives for a long time while Pluto was in Sagittarius. But it's more than that. Sagittarius is also the sign of information, global information, understanding, learning, and disseminating information. And with Pluto going into Sagittarius, we have the explosion of the internet and an explosion of information available to anyone like never before. And suddenly there really is genuine freedom of speech, because people all over the world can start a blog, can write a column, can reach people like never before. And then we had Facebook, social media, YouTube. So Pluto in Sagittarius led to the most phenomenal explosion of truth. Now, Sagittarius, all about truth. Suddenly there's truth and learning available everywhere, not just about politics and history, but about every other subject. And you have so many different perspectives and voices to choose from. And for once, we have unbelievable freedom of speech, freedom of expression, all very typical of Pluto in Sagittarius. So on one hand, we had religions becoming more extreme with Pluto in Sagittarius. Obviously, there's hidden hand at work there stimulating these things. They don't happen always organically. But we also have the explosion of truth and information as represented by the internet. So that is pretty exciting. And of course, again, wars as we go into Pluto in Sagittarius, which we didn't necessarily have with Pluto in Scorpio. So then what happens in 2008 as Pluto enters Capricorn? Well, we had the financial crash, which is perfect symbolically. Pluto, destruction, upheaval, chaos. Capricorn, finances in the banking sector and money. And throughout the period Pluto's been in Capricorn, they've been kicking this down the road and just keeping things going, whereas the crash in 2008 has never really been fully resolved. It never came full cycle. All the problems are still there in the system, and they've done a great job of papering over the cracks in the meantime, haven't they? That's why I think when Pluto finally leaves Capricorn for Aquarius next year, we'll see the denouement of this financial crash, and we will go into an entirely new financial system, which is what Pluto in Capricorn's been setting us up for. Shortly after Pluto went into Capricorn in 2009, we have the establishment of Bitcoin, which of course people are skeptical about. We still don't know the effect it'll have, but it's also introduced a brand new paradigm in the term of money, and also has brought to the fore Austrian economics, which I believe is the real economics and the way to go, and possibly a destruction of Reaganomics, supply side economics for good. But also during Pluto in Capricorn, massive racking up of debt. Trump came in promising to reduce it. He increased it by another 4 trillion or whatever. We have massive debt in the UK, and after COVID again, extreme amounts of national debt that have become like a burden that is going to it's just too big to be sustainable in the long run, which is why this financial system is on its last legs, as we can see with the problems in Japan and the stock market. I did say on my blog the problems would start in Japan, and they're doing so. And they'll probably spread to the UK next. So more on that later. Now, what Capricorn also represents the establishment, and the establishment is the political parties, the police, the judiciary, the the civil service. And during Pluto and Capricorn, we have seen the destruction of faith in those institutions totally. In a large way, the election of Donald Trump represented people's frustration with a system that they wanted to go for this kind of maverick outsider, rebel, whatever. In the UK, people voted for Brexit because people no longer have faith in the system and in the two-party system, and that's breaking down. Well, in Europe, they don't really have a two-party system as much, but they still have this false paradigm of left versus right. But people now are beginning to see through that. They're beginning to see this difference between left and right and red and blue as a way to divide people. And the elite stay in power by dividing people. And they need these false lines or fault lines based on other things like race and ethnicity and religion to keep dividing people so no one really joins the dots. And Pluto in Capricorn has really seen a lot of people waking up to where the real power lies, to the big power structure. Pluto, Capricorn's also the patriarchy, so a lot of people might see it as the destruction of the patriarchy. But I don't see that, for me, that's not such a big thing. I don't see men as the problem. Human beings are the problem, and especially those who are in elite positions. So that brings us to Pluto in Aquarius. Now, a lot of people think of Aquarius as like happy-go-lucky, kind of free-spirited, hippie, new agey, and there's definitely an element of it. As Pluto goes into Aquarius, you're going to see more and more people wanting to go offline, go organic, live off-grid, live a kind of hippie lifestyle, perhaps with huge increases and difficulty in owning homes. You might find more people living in collectives or living in sort of commune-style arrangements where everyone chips in and people try and avoid the banking and the money system. We're going to see an enormous amount of that. So I think Pluto in Aquarius represents a huge amount of awake, enlightened people, spiritual people breaking away and trying to live away from the system. But there's also a very, very authoritarian side to Aquarius. So a lot of people are going to plug more into the matrix. They're going to sort of go into the mainframe. They're going to give up their freedom of speech, their freedom of movement. They're all in the name of safety and living a comfortable life, or because they just won't give up the salaries they have. So for people who are doing fairly well in the current system, they're going to buy more into, yes, climate change, let's lock down, or let's share cars, or let's live in 15-minute cities. They will be terrified to lose what they have, so they'll keep giving up more and more and more of their freedoms just to cling on to the security. So they'll give away freedom for security and give away all their freedoms eventually, whereas other people will totally opt out and therefore have increasing freedoms, although far less luxury. So I see a total split in society with Pluto and Aquarius. Now, Aquarius is also the sign of technology, so we're thinking AI, so we're thinking explosions of cryptocurrency, AI taking over in terms of doing loads and loads of jobs, and we're talking here even white-collar jobs, accountancy, judges, lawyers, doctors. I mean, AI is going to take vast swathes of jobs, of course, which is going to mean people live on universal basic income. So we could see. Now, Aquarius is also related a little bit to ideas around communism, and what communism said, everyone gets paid the same, regardless of, whether you're a doctor or a street sweeper, everyone kind of should get the same. And I think Pluto and Aquarius could be a great leveler, because you're no longer going to see your blue collar versus white collar, because when AI is doing the jobs of a white collar worker, what then use is having a degree in law, a tax, or even an actuary? What use is it going to do you? When AI can do that job, you're going to be leveled down to the level of blue collar or even below, because things like being a plumber or builder or doing like really technical grubby work with your hands or agricultural work can't necessarily be done as easy by a machine. So I see Pluto and Aquarius as being a great class leveler. So you won't now feel that difference between middle and lower class, because it's just going to level it all out. And because the youth coming up are going to really struggle to find jobs, so they won't automatically slip into these working class, middle class categories. But again, Aquarius represents a very authoritarian power structure. So we will see the elite consolidating power and gaining even more power unless people can finally unite. Because as we know, Pluto in Aquarius, the last time was during the American Revolution. And we know something pretty exceptional took place when people really came together and, embraced both science and humanitarianism. That was what caused the American Revolutionary War, which saw the American Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Now, these have all been totally eroded, but maybe these can be reborn, and principles of true freedom of speech and true democracy, not this fake democracy we have right now, can be reestablished. So there's an awful amount of hope with Pluto going into Aquarius. There's hope for people breaking away and perhaps creating a new civilization that everyone else can join once the rest crumbles, because it will crumble under its own weight. We'll see a totally new financial system, as the old financial system that was kept alive in Capricorn can no longer sustain itself and begins to crumble under the weight of its own illegitimacy and its own excesses. We'll see what was created through all the deregulation of Pluto in Scorpio now come full tilt to lead to the smashing of economies that have become just based on derivatives and moving money around without creating any real value. And so I'm sure I'll have more to say on Pluto and Aquarius. But guys, I hope you enjoyed this, a little bit of a political flavor, as you know, which is my favorite thing. And I hope I have proved to you that Pluto in a new sign is big. I mean, I've given you loads of examples. Oh, just to come back, I did say to you that I would end by talking on Pluto in Aries. I don't have any specifics. It's way back in time. Records weren't kept as well. But this was the time when the pioneers got out there to America, Australia, South Africa, were creating the farms, the infrastructure, building buildings, roads, bridges, this incredible human feat of creating functioning societies, farmlands, towns out of wilderness. And that showed the human spirit of enterprise, endeavor, courage, and the pioneering spirit of Aries. So if you want to know what Pluto in Aquarius means, think of the essence of Aquarius. Think of the essence of Pluto as being destruction, but also rebirth. And think of Aquarius as being hope, upliftment, humanitarianism, ultimately higher levels of awareness.